My guest is Jay Richards. He's the director. You know, if I go through all his credentials, we're going to have a podcast in and of itself, so I can't do that. But anyway, he's the director of the DeVos Center for Life, Religion, and Family. He's the senior research fellow in religious liberty and civil society at the Heritage Foundation. He's senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. He's executive editor of The Stream. He's an editor, an author, and that of more than a dozen books. I want you to really underscore that point. I mean, you're a master at turning the tables. You say self-interest is not necessarily greed, but is actually the basis for the golden rule. So just sort of a recapitulation of what you just said.
Yeah, and so selfishness is a disorder. Selfishness, all sins are sort of disorders of things. And selfishness is, or greed, right, is a kind of a misordering of one's priorities. And so you're focused on yourself or the desire for something, even at the cost of yourself or others. That's a selfishness. Self-interest, I'm breathing right now. So every time I breathe and take a breath, or you take a breath, we're acting in our self-interest. Every time you look both ways before you cross the street, or go to bed on time, or show up to work on time, you're acting in your self-interest. None of us think, well, that's sort of a necessary evil that I have to do that. No, that's how we're designed. We're embodied beings that exist in particular times and places. We need food and air and shelter. And if we're properly functioning adults, we are able to do those kinds of things. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And so that's why when Jesus's formulation of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, what's presupposed? What's presupposed is there's a proper way that things ought to be done to you. So in other words, you have a proper interest in yourself. And if your conscience is properly formed, you can actually use that as a guide to figure out how you should treat others. So if you have a properly formed conscience, you're going to understand what you as a human person need to flourish. And then once you realize that, you can say, okay, now, so because I need this to flourish, other people need that as well. But notice you can't even do that sort of moral calculation unless there's a proper interest that you have. That's what self-interest is. And so what we want to think of is this kind of proper domain of things over which we have control and interest that involves ourselves and then our families and our children and our spouses. That's our self-interest. Selfishness is a distortion of that. And then when we're properly ordered, we are able to use that to realize how we ought to treat other people as well. So notice that actually makes it more sense of our moral lives. It also makes a lot more sense of our economic lives as well.
One of the juicier sections of your book is under the subheading, quote, "Don't follow your passion." Why not follow your passion?
That is, and so I have to tell you, Hank, I used that thing, and I spoke at some Christian high school commencements, and just started. I said, look, I know most people are going to be told follow your passion and your dreams. I'm going to tell you the opposite. And I can tell you that high school kids didn't like it, and every dad in the audience when I gave this speech at these commencements would like take a notepad and start writing it down because, yeah, exactly. So here's the idea. Of course, the passion is just kind of the thing emotionally that we like and that we want to do. And so because of the fact that most of our passions are disordered, telling people they ought to follow their passion is actually a terrible idea in terms of economic advice, because you might be passionate about all sorts of crazy things. You might be passionate about something that's bad, but let's assume it's not. Let's say it's morally neutral. But let's say you're passionate about basketball and you want to be a professional basketball player, but you're also 5'3" and really, really uncoordinated. And so it's probably a bad idea that you would try to spend all of your energy being a professional basketball player. Why? Because you're never going to be very good at it. And if that's sort of job advice, you're not going to be able to make a living at it. What you want to do is find the kind of overlap. If you had a Venn diagram of the things that you're good at, the things that you could be good at, so that you're sort of naturally gifted to do, the things that you could improve, and the things that if you did could actually provide needs for others, and also provide for your needs. Because that's any kind of economically valuable activity is going to be something in which you're producing value for yourself and for others. And when you find those things, my argument is that what you actually do is you find your calling. Most of us don't actually know. God doesn't give us a call on the red phone and tell us, okay, this is exactly what you're supposed to do. We find our calling by kind of testing in this way. But what you'll find is that people that do this, that are really, really happy with their jobs and their professions, that feel fulfilled, it always involves value creation. And it may be doing something really, really boring. I tell the story of Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, tells the story about this guy that was a septic tank company. Well, nobody woke up and said, my calling is to clean septic tanks, right? But he found a way to do it, and he loved doing it because he's got good at it, and he's creating value for other people. That's actually what happened. And so my argument is, find what you could be good at that can provide value for others. You will find your calling, and your passions will follow. They will build upon that if you do that. But notice that's kind of the path of virtue. Whereas if you just start out with whatever kind of suits your fancy, you may not find that. It may be something you love to do, but you're not ever going to make a living at it. And so you're never going to create value doing it. And so the best it could ever be would be a kind of self-indulgent hobby. So that's the idea. But of course, it's not, my argument isn't, go find a job that you're miserable doing because that's just what you're supposed to do. That's not the claim at all. It's that if you do this a different way, you will find the thing that you're actually genuinely, in a sustained way, passionate about, that will also allow you to create value for others. And that's when you find your true flourishing economically.
We can't leave this one alone. You say, as career advice, follow your passion implies one of three things. One, what you want to do right now will match that someone will pay you to do, or match what someone will pay you to do. Two, people ought to pay you to do whatever you want to do. And three, people should be forced to pay you to do whatever you want to do. And you say dumb, dumber, and then evil.
Yes, evil, exactly. So people should force you, like, look, okay, I wanted to be a rock singer, right? I will confess, this is an idea, but I would probably, let's say I'm just not any good at it. I can carry a tune, but let's say I'm terrible. But if that's your passion, right, and you're supposed to follow it, in order to actually make a living doing that, you'd have to force people to pay you to do it, because nobody's going to do it voluntarily. And so you're basically, that's slavery, right? When you force somebody's labor to do something, that's a form of slavery. And so that's kind of working it out economically. That's crazy. Now, of course, you're never going to be in a situation to be able to force somebody to pay you to be a rock singer. And so what you're going to end up doing is probably either advocating policies that are terrible economically, or just never actually finding your calling and never finding a way to create value for others, and so value for yourself economically. And that's a bad thing, because I think God, he created Adam and Eve. He blesses and commands them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, so that our reproductive capacity as humans, that is to produce after our kind, and to produce, to be fruitful, right? Those are actually related capacities of being made in the image of God. And so we find our fulfillment as humans made in the image of God, both in our families and also in our economic productivity. And we want both of those to be in alignment. But we often have to find how to be economically productive. We have to find something that will create value for others, because that's what economics is about, is producing value. And so it's always going to ultimately be oriented toward the needs of other people.
So I want you to elaborate on this just a little more. So just making this personal, I found the needle in the haystack doing what I'm doing right now. And I remember my dad saying years ago, your work ought to be your play. Mm-hmm. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, it's not that what I do is easy, but I love it because I've been created to do this very thing.
Yeah. It sounds like, and you found it, right? You found yourself in it. And my sense, and I know people like this, that, well, you ask them, okay, how did you end up doing this? Oh, I just knew I always wanted to do it. And I would say sometimes that happens. Like you said, sometimes you find the needle in a haystack. But if I'm going to give a group of 120 college freshmen advice, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you're oriented properly and you have the intuition to be able to figure that out. The other thing is that some people are really good at lots of different things, right? And so some people are just very gifted. They are musical and they are disciplined and they have wonderful personalities and they're great at math and they're very athletic. And so it turns out there's 1,000 things they could do. And so they could, there's one of the 1,000 things, they'll pick the one that they like and they're going to prosper. But if you're sort of talking about averages, right, the humans are a normal distribution, I'm going to give everyone advice. I'm going to say, okay, what I want you to do is find the thing that you could be good at and you could develop that would also create value. And sometimes you have to, I say that in the book, you might have to try 3 or 4 different things before you find this. But that's a much more reliable way for the average person to kind of find their calling than this idea to follow your passion, just because of the fact that very often our passions are disordered. That wouldn't be true if your passions are properly ordered. If your passions are governed by your reason and your conscience is properly ordered, then your initial passions might actually be a valuable guide. But I'm sort of working on the assumption that most people don't have their passions aligned in that way.
Yeah, again, that's a juicy part of the book. It's worth getting the book just for that one section, The Human Advantage, the Future of American Work in an Age of Smart Machines.